The goal of the ARC network is to create and cultivate a broad community that bridges the gap between researchers and practitioners. As the STEM Equity Brain Trust, the ARC network works to promote systemic change by collecting previous work and producing new perspectives, methods, and interventions. The ARC network is funded by the National Science Foundation's Advanced Program, and the Association for Women in Science serves as the backbone organization. You can learn more about the ARC network on our website, which is equityandstem.org. And if you're not already part of the ARC network community, that's where you can also join. Next, I'd like to briefly introduce our project director for the ARC network, Dr. Crystal Bedley, who's going to be moderating today's webinar. This is the first one that she's been joining us on, so it's a great pleasure to be able to turn this over to her so she can share a little bit about herself and introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Heather. I wanted to start by saying that in these unprecedented times, if a toddler walks through the room, we try to get her down for a nap, but we have to be flexible and open to this situation that we're living in. So I hope everyone feels that same level of comfort, even in the Q&A. We anticipate that other folks may join our conversation. As an exciting and rapidly expanding dimension of the ARC network, our ARC communities of practice includes groups such as the Society for Women Engineers, AAAS Sea Change, the AIM Network, LGBTQ Physicists, Society of STEM Women of Color, Do It, Advanced Grantees, and other diversity, equity, and inclusion working groups doing the on-the-ground work of intersectional equity in STEM. They're developing and implementing policies, programs, and practices in academic departments, federal labs, scientific and engineering societies, and companies across the country. So we're excited to be able to highlight that work and share the research occurring in these different communities across multiple platforms, as Heather has mentioned, including our online resource library on Mendeley and in future webinars. Now we can move on to why we're here today. So it's my pleasure to moderate this session with one of our communities of practice, the Society of Women Engineers. For more than 6 decades, SWE has given women engineers a unique place and voice within the engineering industry. SWE is centered around a passion for their members' success and continues to evolve with the challenges and opportunities reflected in today's exciting engineering and technology specialties. Every year, SWE conducts a literature review on women in engineering, offering a summary of the most recent scholarly research on gender equity in engineering and related fields. Annually, researchers produce significant quantity of scholarly research in this area, so the SWE Literature Review is critical to synthesizing that existing knowledge, helping both scholars and practitioners keep up to date with the latest trends. So here to tell us more about SWE and their annual literature reviews is Dr. Roberta Rincon, the Senior Manager of Research at SWE. I'm just going to give a brief bio and then turn the floor over to you. As SWE's Senior Manager of Research, Roberta oversees the organization's research activities on gender equity issues affecting girls and women in engineering from school to career. Before joining SWE, Roberta was a Senior Research and Policy Analyst at the University of Texas for the University of Texas System. She has over 15 years of experience in educational research and policy analysis. In her current role, she shares SWE's research on gender equity in engineering and technology with academic, industry, and policy researchers and practitioners to inform their STEM diversity efforts. Roberta holds a BS in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, an MBA and an MS in information management from Arizona State University, and a PhD in educational policy and planning from UT Austin. Thank you for sharing your work with us on today's webinar.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Crystal. All right, I'm just going to jump right in because there's a lot to cover. So this is what I'm planning to discuss today. Really just give a little background about SWE, talk a bit about the data on women, girls and women in engineering and technology, and then talk a little bit about our own research and resources that we have available that you might be interested in and make use of, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So before we get started, I'm really curious to know who is listening in on this. And so we've got a little poll that has been set up for us to learn a bit more about you. So if you could just let us know who you are. So I have that in mind as I'm speaking. This is a really cool feature, Heather. Awesome. All right. Fantastic. Okay, it looks like it's just a number of faculty and staff listening in, which makes sense, Ava's Art Network. But we've got a pretty varied audience. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to jump in, get started with just talking a little bit about SWE's mission. We aim to empower women and support women to achieve their full potential in their careers as engineers and technologists and leaders. And we're really, really focused on demonstrating the value of diversity and inclusion in the engineering and tech professions. This is something that we, of course, we're a diversity serving organization. We've cared about this issue from the beginning. But I think over the last few years, we've been a bit more purposeful in focusing on the value of diversity and inclusion across all different identities. And so the Art Network is amazing to be a part of because of that focus on intersectionality. And we are, as an organization, are really trying to make greater efforts to focus on that as well and appreciate the diversity of our own membership and the value that they provide to the organizations that they work with. We've been around since 1950. We're actually celebrating our 70th anniversary this year. And we had a big celebration planned for next month. Unfortunately, that won't happen. But we continue with our work. We appreciate the history that our organization has and the resources that we've gained over those decades. We have about 40,000 members worldwide. Half of those college students, undergraduate and graduate students, and the other half in the professional sector. We have a growing SWE Next membership, which is our free K-12 membership. It's very new. It's only been around for about 3 years. And it's part of our outreach efforts to try and interest girls and educate girls in just engineering and technology as careers. We have a growing international membership, that 40,000 plus membership. We have a number of members in Asia, growing membership in Europe and South America, and we provide different events and activities to encourage networking and communication and sharing of best practices and support and encouragement and empowerment among all of our members around the world. So I'm going to dive right into the data because I think it's really important for us to understand how things have changed and the trends over time. So for women in STEM, we've seen a growth in the representation of women in STEM occupations overall. But that growth in representation has really varied depending on the field. So what this graph is showing is that blue line, since the 1960s, we've seen tremendous increase in representation among women in engineering. Unfortunately, we're only at about 13% of the engineering workforce being women right now. But when you look back to 1950, when we started, 1% of working engineers at that time were women. So yes, definitely great progress seen, but there's so much more work to be done. And when we compare against like chemists and biologists, we can see that they also have seen tremendous growth, and they're getting closer to that gender parity point than we're seeing in engineering or in computer science, which is that gray bar, that gray line right there. We've actually seen a decrease since 1990 in women in computer science, and that is something that is, as an organization, we of course are very interested in turning that trend around. A number of organizations are focusing on girls and women and in coding and in computer science and programming, and And I think that we're starting to see sort of a leveling out. We're at about 26% of computer scientists in the workforce are women right now. So it's important for us, when we talk about STEM, to disaggregate some of this data and see exactly what things look like by discipline, by field, by profession. So part of our work is really getting girls interested in engineering and technology. And one of the places that we look at to give us an idea of what their interest levels look like is the Higher Education Research Institute's annual American Freshman Survey. So they issue a survey every year, and one of those questions focuses on college freshmen' interest in certain fields. This particular graph is showing engineering, math, statistics, and computer science. And you can see that over time since 2008, we've seen growing interest from girls to major in these particular programs in college. We've seen growth overall, though, from men as well. And so it's still very low among women. You can see only about 10% right now of young college freshmen are indicating, women are indicating that they are considering majoring in these fields. But when we think about the growing interest overall, this next slide shows that we're not seeing a big change in the representation of women when we look at the degrees being earned. Because yes, overall, we're seeing a growth in the total number of women earning these degrees in engineering and computer science, but we're seeing a total growth in engineering and computer science degree earners in general. So as a percentage, we're still hovering at around 20% or so. We've actually seen a slight decrease since 2007. So we are increasing. That blue line is the bachelor's degrees, and that's what I've been focusing on. We are also seeing some growth and a little bit better representation or gender diversity among degree earners at the graduate level. It's important for us to dive in and disaggregate this data even further, because yes, we don't want to hide everything, just by looking at STEM, but even within engineering, the degrees earned by women really vary by discipline. The environmental, biomedical, chemical engineering programs are actually seeing greater gender parity in those degrees earned in those programs than we are in like mechanical, electrical, computer engineering. And so what's interesting, though, is that mechanical engineering is the most popular degree earned by women. It has, in numbers, the greatest number of engineering degrees earned by women, but we're still looking at only about 15% of total degrees earned in mechanical engineering are earned by women. So again, looking at disaggregating this data, looking at where some of these programs might be doing better with regards to diversity, gender diversity than in others, and what can we learn from what those programs are doing? What is it that is attracting women? What is it that is keeping women in those programs? Disaggregating even more, if we're to look at who among women are earning these degrees in engineering and computer science, 20% of all degrees earned in these fields are earned by women, but only about 6.5% of degrees earned are earned by women of color. And that is Hispanic women, Black women, Asian women, and Native American women. So diversity and inclusion, we as an organization recognize the need for us to look at intersectionality, intersecting identities with race, ethnicity, as well as gender. And so it's important for us to really pay attention to this kind of disaggregated data when it's available. Another look at degrees earned, bachelor's degrees earned by women of color in engineering and computer science. If we look specifically at Hispanic and Black women earning these degrees in engineering and computer science, what we see is that we're getting a bit of growth among Latinas in these fields, but we're seeing actually a decrease among Black female degree earners in these fields. So we want to pay a bit more attention to how we can better support women in general, but women of color specifically in these particular STEM disciplines. So we've talked about, interest in engineering. We talked about degrees earned in engineering. And now another area that SWE focuses on is retention in the engineering profession. One of the things that I really love this graph, this is from the AAUW's Solving the Equation report from 2015. And it really highlights the issue of retention in the profession itself. We seem to, according to the research, we are seeing women and men retained in the profession for the first 10 or so years at very similar rates. But at around that 15-year mark, we're seeing a divergence. And so it's important for us to, as researchers, to try and understand why, what is causing women to make this decision to leave engineering. And from the research, what we've seen is that they're not leaving the workforce, they're leaving engineering. And so what issues are causing some of that? What challenges are they experiencing? Is it systemic? Is it something within certain stereotypes or biases that they are experiencing that are causing them to see that career advancement is extremely difficult for them, and maybe it's time for them to sort of make a switch. There's there's a bit of research out there that's looking a bit more at this issue. We just need more. So given that about half of the audience is faculty, I think it's important for us to also talk a little bit about some of the data around women in engineering, in colleges of engineering, among the faculty ranks. So over time, what we've seen is a growth in the representation of women in faculty. But as you can see from this graph, and this is from the American Society of Engineering Education, they release this data every year. And yes, it's going up, but it is still extremely low. This is one sector of the professional membership that we are interested in, not just as far as career advancement goes, and it's an important population to focus on, but also because these are role models, these are mentors, these are women that serve in a unique position in these colleges. They are part of the equation of trying to encourage women to consider engineering degree programs, engineering as a profession, and encourage them and support them and to stay in these programs. So right now we're at about 18% of all engineering faculty are women in the tenure track. But we're seeing it heavily skewed towards those lower ranks, the assistant professor right now. Only about 12% of full professors in engineering colleges are women. We're expecting to see this rise. I mean, this is hopefully that we can see some of these assistant professors moving on to associate and full professor over time, but that does take time. We also break this down. We want to look at this by discipline. Mechanical engineering, as I had mentioned, it has the greatest number of women earning degrees by discipline. But as you can see over there on the left, it's still very few in mechanical engineering departments in the faculty who are women. And so we want to encourage more of our students to stay, earn their graduate degrees, go into the faculty ranks, and make sure that these engineering colleges have the culture and climate that are welcoming and supportive for a diverse faculty. We also look at the data around the pay gap, the gender pay gap. And this graph is created from data out of the Pew Research Center. And I'll explain it a little bit because it's a little confusing. So the green diamonds are the average or median annual earnings for women by race ethnicity. So for white women, it's right at around, on average, they earn about $61,000 a year. And this is the full, across STEM workforce, all the STEM workforce. The orange bar is what that income represents as a percentage of white men's pay. So $61,000 on average, that's about 72% of what their white male counterparts earn in the STEM workforce. For Black women, that blue bar it represents the percentage of their earnings as compared to white women's earnings. So Black women are earning about $52,000, $53,000 a year, and that represents about 87% of what their white female counterparts or white women in the STEM workforce are earning, and about 62% of what white men in STEM are earning. Hispanic women at the 61%, 85%. Asian women, it's interesting, they're earning about $81,000, $82,000 a year, which is very close to the $85,000 that the Pew Research Center has indicated is sort of an average earnings for white men. And it's about 133% more, or of what white women earn. So they are earning more than white women in the STEM workforce, but there's still a gap when you look at when you compare their earnings against white men in the STEM workforce. We also look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look specifically at engineering and computing occupations to see what that gap looks like. So across the STEM workforce, we're seeing a fairly large gender pay gap. Within engineering, it's a bit smaller. So for like mechanical engineers, that gap, women earn about 95% of what their male counterparts earn. In areas like electrical engineering and aerospace, it's more like 86%. So it is a smaller gap, but the gap still exists. So I want to talk a little bit about our own research. So this is all data that we look at that's available from the National Science Foundation, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Education. So we pull that data, we do look at that data, but we also do our own research. And I like to think of it as research areas, three different research areas. The first being the K-12 sector. We really want to focus on what we can do to inspire girls to pursue a STEM education, pursue engineering and technology specifically, but broadly a STEM education. In the college sector, we want to understand how we can better support women on any of the educational pathways that they choose to follow that can lead to a career in engineering. We're seeing a lot of blending now of high school to college, a lot of dual credit, a lot of early college high schools, and a lot of students that are choosing to enter a two-year college for a variety of reasons, cost being one of the top ones. They're choosing to start their college education at a two-year college and transfer. So we have to be mindful of these different pathways and figure out ways to better support women and students in general on these various paths. In the engineering workforce, actually both in education and in the workforce, we want to understand what we can do to increase diversity and inclusion, and also, with regards to retention, promote efforts to encourage them to stay in the profession. And so a lot of our research is really focused on these specific areas. With regards to the K-12 sector, right now we've got a project that we're doing with researchers out of the University of Texas at Austin to understand the development of an engineering identity. So we've got this great SWE-NEXT group of girls, SWE-NEXT members. A number of them are high school students. So we're working with them to understand, these girls have indicated by joining SWE-NEXT that they have some level of interest in engineering and technology. So what over, the 3-year course of this project, what is influencing their decisions to major in engineering or computer science or not? And so we're hoping that, once this study completes, which I think we're about halfway through, so, in another 1.5 to 2 years, we should have a better understanding of some of those peer and adult influences that are maybe helping or hurting to their decisions to stay on that engineering path. In the college sector, in that college bin, we've been working on community college transfer research. We've conducted 2 phases of so far. The first one to understand what the success rates look like for women who decide to begin their degree programs at a 2-year college. What do their success rates look like as far as transfer and degree attainment in engineering or computer science? And how does that compare to their male counterparts? And what we found is that women on this pathway, they switch out of these majors at significantly higher rates than their male counterparts. So it's not that they're dropping out, they are switching majors. And so this is a phenomenon that we saw quite a bit of in the university sector, years ago. We've gotten a lot of great programs in place. The universities have done a lot of work to try and retain women in these majors, and we've seen the results of that work. We want to take this research and understand what we can do to better support women who start on that 2-year college and intend to transfer. We want to keep them in these programs. And so the phase 2 of this research was really trying to understand what sort of challenges these students were experiencing on this pathway. And is there something that organizations like SWE and other diversity serving organizations can do to better support students on this pathway? We've done a lot of work in the workplace, the engineering workplace. We've done a couple of studies around gender bias in engineering, both here in the United States as well as in India. We've looked at the climate and culture of workplaces. We've also done a study with the National Society of Black Engineers to look specifically at women of color in early career. So all of this research is available on our website, research.swe.org. Wish we could do more of it, but it is, it's time consuming, and so we're working and we're trying to find great researchers to collaborate with who are interested in these topics as well, so that we can all learn. I think that it's important for organizations like ours to understand what challenges and obstacles women are facing, what sort of structural or systemic issues are in place that we can inform our corporate partners about and work with employers and share best practices so that we can improve the diversity and inclusion within engineering, within technology, and in that way better support our members. So as Crystal mentioned, we do release an annual literature review every year. We've been doing this since 2002, and this is a picture of the compilation of that literature review. So every year since 2002, you can find that on our website, and it's just a review of the social science literature around women and girls in STEM broadly, in engineering specifically. And so our 2019 literature review, oh no, did I drop you?
You
Hello?
haven't dropped us, but your video was frozen. Okay. That's all.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I was like, I lost you. Sorry
your
about that.
Your voice was coming through crystal clear.
That's why I call on my phone instead of going through, because my internet can sometimes be spotty. But
and all of us are on the internet right now. Yes, we can see you. Right. You are moving and not frozen. We just need you to reshare your screen.
Reshare, okay. Yeah. Let's see. Let me go back here. Let me go back on and let me share. How's that? Awesome. So did I lose you at is this the part where I lost you?
Yeah.
You're in the perfect place.
Awesome. Sorry about that. All right. So as I said, this is a compilation of our literature reviews for 2019's literature review, which was released last month. The literature review authors reviewed about 200 peer-reviewed articles, books, papers, all focused on research around women and girls in engineering and STEM broadly. And then, of course, identifying some of the gaps in the literature and the research, and with the hopes of encouraging further study in these areas. I want to talk a little bit about this year's Lit Review, and there on the right is the issue of the magazine where the literature review was published. Just talk high level about some of the topics that we covered. First off is looking at level of interest and why more girls aren't interested in pursuing engineering and technology degrees. Then looking at the college population and the engineering student experience, looking at the climate and culture within engineering colleges, looking at the workforce, women's working experiences, again, climate and culture, and then the coping strategies. And what's great is that we're seeing more research in industry now than we have seen in the past. A lot of research has been done in colleges of engineering amongst faculty, and that is definitely very important research, definitely important work that needs to be done. But we also need to understand what systemic issues, challenges women are experiencing out in the private sector as well, in government, et cetera, outside of academia. Intersectionality is, of course, a topic of great focus right now. International comparisons is something that we looked at. There's a lot of research that's being done outside of the United States. For a number of years, we've really been focused on US studies, but we do have a section in this literature review that looks at comparisons. So, you know, the experiences of women in other countries, in European countries, for example, they are different. There are some different challenges and issues that they experience, but it's surprising how similar some of these challenges are as well. And so we can learn from one another when we do these kinds of comparisons. And then one last area that we've started focusing a bit more on, we're seeing more research around men and masculinities. Engineering is a very male-dominated profession. Masculinity is something that a number of researchers are trying to better understand, looking at men in engineering and seeing what their experiences, their attitudes are. A lot of issues around the view that engineering is a meritocracy, the competitive nature of engineering and how that can influence, you know, men's and women's experience both. Just looking at how engineering culture is gendered. These are copies of the covers of our magazines. We've been publishing the State of Women in Engineering magazine for 4 years now. And this is where our Lit Review is housed. And you can find these on our website, research.swe.org, along with a lot of the data that I covered. All of our research reports are out there. It's really, we want to think of it as sort of like a one-stop shop for data statistics research around women in engineering and technology. And all of those literature reviews that I talked about, we've provided that information to the ARC network for the resource library. So all of that is there as well. We want to share this broadly. We want to support you know, your work as you whether you are a researcher and interested in understanding, you know, in using this research and kind of helping to fill some of those gaps in the research, or if, you know, you are interested in using the research and implementing some type of data-driven initiative within your own organization, we're hoping that you can make use of the research that way as well. So that is the end of my presentation, and I think I've got some time. Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for this opportunity to present this.
And thank you, Roberta, for this wonderful in-depth overview. And I know that we're going to probably start digging a little bit deeper into the sort of range of data that you shared with us. I think, so there's a few questions, but I think because you had just wrapped up with talking about adding all of the bibliographic information to our resource library, I wanted to take a moment and share that information with folks now, and that'll give people some time to brainstorm, and then we can go through the questions that are already starting to populate the Q&A feature.
Great.
For everyone, I'm just going to...
Should I stop share?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, Heather said no.
No?
Put the share back, whatever Heather says goes. Move it back up there.
Okay.
It's just because one of the questions from the audience is referring to a specific slide. So you might as well keep it up there. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Back to you, Crystal.
Thanks. So if anybody is interested in taking a deeper dive into all of the data sources, all of the articles that you drew from, articles and books, other scholarly publications that you drew from to put together this presentation today, we recommend, I put the step-by-step in our chat feature for folks interested in learning more about that. You can, if you haven't already signed up to be a member of the ARC network, we recommend that you do that. And once you have done that step, if you don't already have a Mendeley account, you can sign up for Mendeley, where you'll receive an invitation to join the ARC network group. Once you've done that, once you've downloaded Mendeley as an application, or if you prefer to use it through its website feature, you'll see the library. And currently, we have added all of the resources, and are in the process of tagging these resources. So about a quarter of them have additional labels to help you go through the range of materials that are available. So for those folks who want to take a deeper dive, that is one way in which you can do that. In addition to, as Roberta pointed out, going to the SWE website and going to that one-stop shop data hub. With that, we'll move on to the Q&A. So the first question here, I think, is taking us back to slide 11, where you had the breakout between Black and Hispanic women engineers.
Hey, slide, whoops.
It might have been
this one. No, yes, 11.
Perfect. And Heather can help me with the unmute feature, but Liz Litzer is wondering if you had any thoughts on the decreases among Black women.
Ooh, the thoughts on it. Well, you know, that's one of the reasons why we've been trying to work with the National Society of Black Engineers. And you know, we did that study on women of color in early careers, trying to understand what exactly it is that they are experiencing. And one of the really interesting things in that study, because, you know, we didn't only speak with Black women in engineering. We spoke with Hispanic women, we spoke with Native American women. And one of the things that we found is that, you know, we were expecting to see, you know, this intersectionality issue, you know, issues of like biases, stereotypes with regards to race and gender. We saw a bit more of that and heard a bit more of that among Black women than we did among, you know, other women of other races. Women of other races tended to focus more on the gender issue. But Black women were really sharing a lot of their experiences, you know, a lot of times negative experiences with regards to both race and gender. And so, I mean, this issue of intersectionality is really, really important, because there are experiences and you know, slights or microaggressions that are experienced by different women. You know, their experiences are very different, and so I you know, my thought, based on that research as well as some of the other researches out there, is that, you know, race and gender among Black women are really, their experiences are very unique, and we kind of get, it kind of gets hidden when we just look at gender. A lot of women that we spoke to are moving to other parts of the country. They're an only a lot of times. And so when you're moving somewhere where both your race and your gender make you sort of an only, it's a very challenging environment, I think, for a lot of women. So this is also experienced in colleges of engineering. A number of women that we spoke to, you know, they didn't really experience that in their colleges of engineering when they attended colleges, you know, that were like Hispanic serving institutions or, you know, minority serving institutions. They don't really see that as early, I guess, as some others where they attend sort of a white majority institution. So my thoughts.
Great, no, thank you. That is really fascinating to think through. Not only the intersectionality piece, but also the tokenism, right, that happens.
Right.
So, yeah. Another question, I think more in line with the literature review from this last year, is how much attention is given to using standard measures of climate across engineering contexts, such as academia, from community colleges to the PhD, government, or industry, for women as well as women with intersecting identities. So if you could speak to us about any sort of standard measures about climate and culture that you've come across.
Oh goodness, that's a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer for that, because we, you know, we're putting together a program right now where we're looking into that, that specific issue. How do we measure climate and culture? And I think that there are some great, you know, survey instruments out there. We'll, you know, in the research that we've done, we've borrowed some questions, but I think, you know, there's no one great tool that I've found. Everybody sort of like uses different measures, and they don't, you know, I'm thinking about specifically in industry, and that's where we're kind of, you know, putting our focus right now. There's so many different organizations that are trying to measure this. You know, the research, I think there's some really great things in development, and you know, we've borrowed from some great tools, but I don't have like one specific recommendation for that. Oh yeah, if you have one, please let me know, because as I said, we're trying to put something together right now, and in our, you know, looking around for something, it's kind of all over the place. And so we're trying to figure out, you know, what is the best way to do this, so that we can sort of see consistently across organizations and do some sort of like comparison, because it's really hard to share best practices if people are measuring things so differently.
Great, thank you for sharing your insights on that. In this moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to someone who has raised her hand and have her ask a question for you. So, Bonita, I think you should be able to. We should be able to hear you now. No, hold on.
Okay, and then unmute myself. I got a little signal to unmute myself.
Okay, great.
Oh, thank you. Well, actually, I am very interested in being able to talk with you about the qualitative research I've done. I teach gender and engineering in the graduate program at Santa Clara University. And there have been some specific things that I've discovered, and the students have discovered, makes such a huge difference. And I've worked with a number of organizations as well, make a huge difference in terms of, I've had women tell me that they've left engineering, left their company and left engineering because of, for instance, the use of devil's advocate. Are you all familiar with what devil's advocate is? You know, you propose an idea and all you get are doubts and pokes and this is wrong and what's wrong with it. And I've had people just, you know, what I call more relational people, just be beaten down by that, feeling that they can't contribute. The message is that their ideas aren't good. And with some strength being able to say, this is just not the place for me. And what I've done is introduce that's a mindset that comes from you could say the masculinity, although I use the more individualistic mindset. I don't like to say masculine and feminine, but rather attribute it to the mindset, the individualistic mindset, which is also the prevailing mindset of the US, but not US women as much. Anyway, what we do is we've deciphered that using just a video of Gary playing devil's advocate with Leslie's idea, I asked people, well, what is Leslie playing? If Gary's playing devil's advocate, what is Leslie playing? And most people say she's trying to defend herself. And I point out that what Leslie is trying to do is build an idea. She's introducing an idea, she wants to build it. And it was actually a man in one of my seminars who said, why don't we call it Angel's Advocate? And to be able to have the distinction between Devil's Advocate and Angel's Advocate, and how Angel's Advocate builds ideas and expands and actually ties into doing fire prevention, building out in front of fires instead of just fighting fires. There's a whole set of competencies I've identified. But it makes a huge difference. And once the guys get it, they learn how they need to be able to incorporate it for its value, and also to be able to understand how often the devil's advocate is taken as an attack. So these are the kinds of differences that I've identified, and there's a whole complex of them that has made a huge difference. And one of our founders of another wonderful nonprofit for women in tech told me that she left engineering because of devil's advocate. So I would like to talk with you more about this and how we can turn it into research, Roberta, and some of the other things that I've found. Because I do have students saying, oh, I wish I had this earlier in my career, both men and women. So I appreciate that the men are taking it to it and learning from it as well. So I don't want to take any more time, but if anyone wants to respond to that, I'd be happy to. But Roberta, I'd like to get in touch with you about what we could do together.
Absolutely, I'd love to talk more about this. Very interesting research that you've done on this. And I don't know that I've heard of Angel's Advocate, so I'd love to learn more.
That's the whole point. That's the whole
point.
Yeah.
Bring language.
Wonderful.
Have you ever heard
Bonita, I'm sorry, Bonita, I don't mean to cut you off, but I have lots of questions and I want to ensure that other folks have a chance to ask. Okay. All right. I hope you two get to continue to connect offline. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to go out of order a little bit because thematically it makes sense to, we had someone ask if you can elaborate on the masculine culture studies. Will this be used to engage boys and young men in changing culture to be more inclusive?
That's a great question. You know, that's our hope, is that, you know, because this is not a women's issue to fix, right? It's not a girl's problem to fix. We need the help of everyone, both men and women, to understand the value of diversity and inclusion and to work towards that. And so this research that we're seeing more of, my hope, and I think, you know, the hope of those that we work with, is that we can educate about the importance of getting everybody involved. And as Bonita had said, right, it's like you have to make people aware that the problem exists, that this is happening. And sometimes it is, you know, through role plays, or it's through, you know, examples. I met a researcher or a faculty member about a year or so ago who was incorporating unconscious bias into his computer science programming course, which I thought was ingenious, right? It's like you have a bunch of programmers, you know, future IT professionals in the room who are learning about this and experiencing unconscious bias, you know, as they are learning about this programming. And so incorporating some of those lessons into the educational sector, as well as, you know, in professional development and you know, certain trainings, and just being aware of it when you're doing performance evaluations and making some of these really important workplace decisions is important. I think that's how we're going to change the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in alignment with that, another question that Mune Briznak has pointed out is, could you comment on the leadership style that's challenging women due to sort of a historical male-dominated perception? She's wondering what system level has to be evolved to accept women's style of leadership. So I guess to the extent that you touched on leadership in these studies, if you have.
Yeah, let me think. So some of the issues around leadership, I don't know if it's necessary leadership style, but getting buy-in from leadership that these diversity and inclusion measures are important. That's one aspect of it. But as far as a greater value that's seeing that all of these, when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about like physical diversity. We're talking about diversity of experiences, diversity of perspectives, diversity of different management, the way that we work, the way that we think. And there are, the research says that there are some differences, and that sometimes over time that women will start to take on some of those more masculine tendencies in order to be successful, so to speak, in their chosen profession. How do we help leaders, organizations to appreciate the diversity that our different styles of working, of learning, of managing can bring to the table? I mean, that's these diverse teams that we learn about. I mean, they have shown to be very, very profitable. They perform better. So, I think a lot of that research is important for us to share. And I think that it hopefully, can lead to some of what is being asked here, an appreciation of our differences and different styles.
Beautifully stated. And I think a nice follow-up to that is several of the questions have been asking to probe sort of different intersectional spaces for women. So I'm going to just throw a few of them out there, and you can elaborate on the one that you have the most to elaborate on. So there's been questions about whether you've done this analysis by socioeconomic status or first-gen status for students. So if you wanted to speak to that. Also, a non-tenured track, if you have been looking at the data for non-tenured track faculty.
Okay.
And finally, if you've examined the number of women on College of Engineering advisory boards. So I know that was a lot.
Yeah, so we have not looked at the number of women in College of Engineering advisory boards. That's something I haven't looked into, but I'll make a note of that. Advisory boards, and we also have not looked at an non-tenure track. I think that is a very relevant point. I think that we do need to pay attention to the growing number of I mean, that is a huge faculty group that is teaching our future engineers, and so we need to be mindful of that and be aware of just understand that group more and the issues that they're facing, which are going to be very different from those who are on the tenure track lines. As far as socioeconomic status goes, I love that. I mean, that's sort of what I looked at, before I came to SWE. Was, when we talk about student success, that's really one of the biggest aspects is, that first generation, low income student population. And I think that, we haven't done a lot of research in that space, but we have been trying to pay a bit more attention to, like our outreach efforts, trying to be a bit more mindful, I guess, or like it's very easy, I think, for us to sort of do outreach, to like go to our own schools and our own neighborhoods and you know, share about engineering and technology within our own little circles. And so being mindful that, you know, there are groups out there, and there are organizations who do this, I know, but going out to those school districts that really don't have anybody in their neighborhood, in their families who are engineers, you know, that they can use as role models. They're the ones who really need the role models. And so with the first generation, though, that did come up in our community college work. That was definitely something that was, it was a very important factor, again, around, you know, this issue of role models, mentors, a support network. You know, a lot of the students that we spoke with and that we surveyed just didn't know anyone. And so their exposure was really through school. And if their school is not really providing that kind of exposure either, and, you know, a lot of that is done through your engineering faculty. And sometimes some of those courses that you're taking early on in those first 2 years are not taught by engineers. They're taught by, you know, people who have studied in STEM, but not necessarily, you know exactly what a mining engineer does, or, you know, an aerospace engineer. So I think it's a very relevant point, and I am interested in doing more. It's just there's a lot that you know we're interested in doing and studying, so it can be a bit challenging to kind of, you know, maintain focus and do some really great in-depth work in a particular area or two.
Thank you for that. So there are a range of the questions continue to come in, and I unfortunately I know that we're pressed for time at this point. I think that we're going to have to wrap up, so I'm sorry for those questions that we did not have a chance to answer. I would recommend reaching out to us. We can make the connections if needed to get those questions answered. And I want to just take a moment to thank you for your time today, for being so engaged, and answering all these innovative and inquisitive questions. So wishing everyone a good day. Oh, good. And thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming webinars, and we'll be sending out the recording via email soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.